The distant sound of galloping horses sent Bethany O'Connor's heart racing as she clutched her 3-month-old daughter tighter to her chest. Crouched behind a cluster of boulders just off the dusty trail leading into the town of Silveridge, Arizona Territory, 1878, she prayed the infant wouldn't cry. Her brother-in-law and his men were still searching for them, and discovery meant certain disaster. "Hush now, Emma," she whispered, gently rocking the baby who stirred in her threadbare blanket. "We've got to stay quiet just a little longer." Bethany's throat tightened as she peered around the rock. The riders were closer now, their silhouettes visible against the setting sun. She recognized the largest man instantly, Victor Blackwell, her late husband's older brother and the cruelest man she'd ever known. He'd made his intentions clear after Thomas died. He would take control of the ranch, and she would become his wife willingly or not. The baby, her precious Emma, was nothing but an inconvenience to him. "She won't survive the winter anyway," he'd said coldly, just 2 days after she'd given birth. Best send her to an orphanage now. Those words had decided everything for Bethany. That very night, she'd gathered what few possessions she could carry, wrapped Emma in a blanket, and fled the ranch that had been her home for the past 3 years. Now, 5 days later, exhausted and hungry, she watched as Victor and his men approached the town. Her small supply of food was gone, her water canteen nearly empty. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and barely $10 to her name. But she had Emma, and that was all that mattered. When the riders disappeared into town, Bethany released the breath she'd been holding. Night was falling, and the desert would soon grow cold. She needed to find shelter for herself and Emma, somewhere Victor wouldn't think to look. With trembling legs, she rose from her hiding place and began walking parallel to the main road, staying hidden among the scrub brush and cacti. Her destination was a small line shack she'd spotted earlier, about a mile outside of town. It looked abandoned, perfect for a night's rest before continuing her journey. The desert night closed in quickly. By the time Bethany reached the dilapidated shack, darkness had fallen completely, the vast sky above filled with countless stars. Emma began to fuss, hungry and uncomfortable. "Just a little longer, sweet girl," Bethany murmured, approaching the shack cautiously. She hadn't considered that someone might be using it. The soft glow of lamplight visible through the cracks in the wooden walls stopped her in her tracks. For a moment, she considered turning back, but Emma's cries grew louder and she had no choice. Shelter was a necessity, not a luxury. Taking a deep breath, Bethany approached the door and knocked softly. Nothing. She knocked again, more firmly this time. The door swung open suddenly, revealing a tall man with a revolver pointed directly at her face. Bethany gasped, instinctively turning to shield Emma with her body. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We mean no harm." The man lowered his gun slightly, his expression shifting from suspicion to confusion as he took in the sight of her and the crying infant. "What in blazes are you doing out here alone at night, madam?" he asked, his deep voice tinged with a slight southern drawl. "We need shelter," Bethany replied simply, too exhausted for elaborate explanations. "Just for tonight. We'll be gone by morning." The man hesitated, then holstered his gun and stepped back, opening the door wider. "Get in here before you both freeze." Relief washed over Bethany as she hurried inside the small, one-room shack. A fire burned in a small stove, filling the space with blessed warmth. A bedroll was laid out in one corner, and a saddle and other riding gear were stacked neatly against the wall. The man had been eating his dinner. A tin plate of beans and bacon sat on a small crate that served as a table. "Name's Hayes Zimmerman," he said, closing the door firmly behind them. "Most folks just call me Hayes." "Bethany O'Connor," she replied, adjusting Emma in her arms. "And this is my daughter, Emma." Hayes nodded, his eyes a striking shade of green she now noticed, assessing them carefully. "You're running from something," he stated. It wasn't a question. Bethany stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "Women with babies don't wander the desert at night unless they're desperate," he said matter-of-factly. And you've got that look in your eye, I've seen it before. Emma's cries grew more insistent and Bethany bounced her gently, trying to soothe her. She's hungry, she explained, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I need to feed her. Hayes nodded and turned his back, offering what privacy he could in the small space. Do what you need to do. I'll add more beans to the pot. You look like you could use a meal yourself. Gratitude and wariness battled within Bethany as she settled in a corner, unbuttoning her dress to feed Emma. The man seemed decent enough, but experience had taught her not to trust too easily. Still, the warmth of the shack and the promise of food were more than she'd dared hope for. As Emma nursed contentedly, Bethany studied Hayes Zimmerman's back. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and scuffed boots. His dark brown hair was a bit too long, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. When he turned slightly to stir the beans, she caught his profile, a straight nose, strong jaw dusted with stubble, and lips pressed into a thoughtful line. How old is she? Hayes asked suddenly, still keeping his back turned. 3 months, Bethany replied. Born in August, he nodded. She sounds healthy, strong lungs. A ghost of a smile touched Bethany's lips. She knows what she wants and makes sure everyone hears about it. When Emma finished nursing, Bethany adjusted her clothing and shifted the now drowsy infant to her shoulder, patting her back gently. It's safe to turn around now, she said softly. Hayes did so, carrying a tin plate of beans and a cup of coffee, which he set down beside her. Eat, he instructed. You look about ready to collapse. Bethany wanted to refuse to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out. Carefully cradling Emma in one arm, she picked up the spoon with her free hand and began to eat. The beans were plain but hot, and at that moment they tasted better than any fine meal she'd ever had. Thank you, she said between bites, for the food and the shelter. Hayes sat on his bedroll, watching her with those intense green eyes. You want to tell me what you're running from, or who? Bethany hesitated, then decided that honesty was her best option. This man had shown her kindness. He deserved the truth. My brother-in-law, she said. After my husband died 6 months ago, he made it clear he intended to take everything: the ranch, the livestock, and me. Her voice faltered. He wanted to send Emma to an orphanage, said she was unnecessary. Hayes's expression darkened. What's his name? Victor Blackwell. Recognition flashed in Hayes's eyes. I know of him. Big rancher from up north, has a reputation for being. He glanced at Emma and seemed to choose his words carefully. Difficult. He's cruel, Bethany stated plainly, and he's in Silveridge now looking for us. We saw him and his men ride in just before sunset. Hayes was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Bethany to the sleeping infant in her arms. Where are you headed? He finally asked. South, she replied. I have a distant cousin in Tucson who might take us in. If not, I'll find work somewhere. I'm good with numbers and can sew. Another long silence followed as Hayes seemed to wrestle with some internal decision. Finally, he stood, his tall frame nearly touching the low ceiling of the shack. Take the bedroll, he said. You and the little one need proper rest. I'll keep watch tonight. But no arguments, Mrs. O'Connor. You're dead on your feet. Too exhausted to protest further, Bethany carefully moved to the bedroll, settling Emma beside her. The simple comfort of lying down after days of running nearly brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, she murmured, already feeling sleep pulling at her. Hayes, he corrected. Just Hayes. Hayes, she repeated, her eyes drifting closed. Thank you, Hayes. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Hayes sitting by the door, his revolver across his knees, watchful eyes fixed on the night beyond the window. Dawn broke with golden light streaming through the cracks in the shack's walls. Bethany woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Emma still slept peacefully beside her, and across the small room, Hayes sat in the same position she'd last seen him, though his eyes were now focused on cleaning his revolver. You stayed awake all night, she observed, her voice rough with sleep. Hayes glanced up. Seemed prudent. I'm sorry to have imposed on you this way. No imposition, he replied simply, returning to his task. Coffee's hot if you want some. Bethany carefully extracted herself from the bedroll, trying not to disturb Emma. She accepted the tin cup Hayes offered, the strong black coffee helping to clear the fog from her mind. I should leave soon, she said after a few sips. It's not safe to stay in one place too long. Hayes reassembled his revolver with practiced efficiency. Blackwell and his men are still in town. 3 riders came by during the night, heading back north, said they'd found no sign of you. Bethany's heart skipped. You spoke with them? From a distance. They didn't come to the door, just saw the light and called out. I convinced them I was just a cowhand passing through. He holstered his weapon. But they'll be back, and they'll be more thorough next time. Fear gripped Bethany's chest. All the more reason for us to leave, and go where? Hayes asked, his gaze direct. Tucson is still 3 days hard riding from here, assuming you had a horse, which you don't. You've got a baby and barely any supplies. I'll manage, Bethany insisted, though she knew her words sounded hollow. I have to. Hayes stood and moved to the window, peering out cautiously. I've been thinking, he said after a moment. I'm headed south myself. Got a job waiting at the Triple R Ranch outside of Benson. It's not Tucson, but it's closer than here and safer. Bethany stared at him, uncertain where he was going with this. I could take you there, he continued. You and Emma. The ranch owner, Mr. Richards, is a fair man with a good-sized operation. He might have worked for you. Hope and suspicion warred within Bethany. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Hayes turned from the window, his expression serious. I know enough. I know you're protecting your child at great risk to yourself. I know Blackwell is the type of man who doesn't take kindly to being defied. And I know what it's like to need help when there's nowhere else to turn. Something in his tone suggested personal experience, but Bethany didn't press. Instead, she asked, what would you want in return? A flicker of hurt crossed Hayes's face before his expression smoothed again. Nothing, Mrs. O'Connor, not everyone has ulterior motives. Shame heated Bethany's cheeks. I'm sorry, it's just no need to explain, he interrupted. These are hard times and trust is a luxury few can afford. He crossed to his saddle and began gathering his belongings. My offer stands, I leave in an hour. You're welcome to ride with me or continue on your own. Emma chose that moment to wake, her small cries filling the shack. Bethany picked her up, soothing her with gentle words. As she looked down at her daughter's face, she knew she had no real choice. Emma's safety had to come before her pride or caution. We'll come with you, she said quietly, and thank you. Hayes nodded once as though the matter was settled. We'll need supplies, I'll ride into town. No, Bethany's alarm was instant. Victor might see you. Victor doesn't know me from Adam, Hayes countered. And I need to get food for the journey, plus something for the little one. You two stay here out of sight. I'll be back before midday. Bethany wanted to argue further but couldn't deny the logic of his plan. They needed supplies and she couldn't risk being seen in town. Be careful, she said instead. A hint of a smile touched Hayes's lips. Always am, Mrs. O'Connor. After Hayes left, Bethany busied herself caring for Emma and gathering their few possessions. She washed as best she could with the limited water available and mended a tear in her skirt. The hours stretched endlessly, worry gnawing at her with each passing minute. What if Hayes didn't return? What if he betrayed them to Victor? What if he was simply abandoning them here, having thought better of his generous offer? By the time hoofbeats approached the shack, Bethany had worked herself into a state of near panic. She clutched Emma to her chest and pressed herself against the wall beside the door, ready to flee if necessary. It's Hayes, came the familiar voice from outside. And I've brought company. Bethany's breath caught. Company? Had he brought Victor after all? The door opened slowly and Hayes entered, his arms laden with packages. Behind him came an older Mexican woman, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun, her dark eyes kind but assessing. Mrs. O'Connor, this is Senora Rosalinda Diaz, Hayes said, setting his packages down. She runs the boarding house in town and has agreed to help us. The woman stepped forward, smiling gently. Your friend tells me you have a little one and are in trouble, she said, her English accented but clear. I have raised 6 children of my own. Perhaps I can help. Relief washed over Bethany, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. Thank you, she managed. We. Words failed her. Senora Diaz's smile widened. No need for words, Mija. Let me see the little angel. Over the next hour, the older woman proved invaluable. She had brought clean clothing for both Bethany and Emma, proper baby blankets, a supply of cloth diapers, and a special herbal tea to help a nursing mother keep her strength. She cooed over Emma in a mixture of English and Spanish, pronouncing her perfecta and strong like her mother. Meanwhile, Hayes unpacked his own purchases: food supplies, canteens of fresh water, and a small revolver which he presented to Bethany. You know how to use this? He asked. Bethany nodded, taking the weapon carefully. My father taught me. And Thomas insisted I keep practicing after we married. Good, keep it with you at all times. Senora Diaz, who was holding Emma, looked up. The men who search for you, they were asking questions in town this morning, she said gravely, offering money for information. They say you stole from them. Bethany's face hardened. The only thing I took was my daughter, whom they wanted to send away. The older woman nodded as though this confirmed something she already knew. Some men have no heart, she said simply. You must leave soon. I will tell no one I saw you, but others in town talk more freely, especially when silver dollars are offered. We're leaving within the hour, Hayes assured her. Is everything prepared as we discussed? My son Juan has taken the extra horse to the South Creek crossing. He will wait until sunset, then bring it back if you do not come. Hayes turned to Bethany. We'll ride double on my horse until we reach the crossing, then you'll have your own mount for the journey south. Senora Diaz handed Emma back to Bethany. I must return now before I am missed. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small cloth bundle. Herbs for the baby if she becomes colicky. Mix with warm water. She pressed the bundle into Bethany's hand, then leaned forward to kiss her cheek. God go with you, Mija. Protect your little one. After the woman left, Bethany turned to Hayes, who was packing their supplies efficiently. How did you know to trust her? She asked. Rosalinda Diaz has been helping people in trouble for decades, he replied without looking up. Her husband was a station master on the Underground Railroad before the war. Old habits die hard in that family. And how did you know that? This time Hayes did look up, a flash of something like pain crossing his features. Because she helped my mother and me once long ago. He secured the last package and straightened. We should move out now while the town is busy with midday business. Within 30 minutes, they were mounted on Hayes's sturdy chestnut gelding, Emma secured to Bethany's chest with a makeshift sling Senora Diaz had fashioned. Hayes sat behind Bethany, one arm around her waist to steady her, the other holding the reins. The proximity was uncomfortable at first. Bethany hadn't been this close to a man since Thomas died, but practicality overrode her discomfort. They rode south, keeping to less traveled paths and dry creek beds when possible. Hayes was a skilled horseman, guiding the gelding over difficult terrain with confidence. He spoke little, his attention focused on their surroundings, constantly alert for any sign of pursuit. As the afternoon wore on, Bethany found herself relaxing slightly, leaning back against Hayes's solid chest. Emma slept peacefully in her sling, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. How did you become a cowboy? Bethany asked, partly to distract herself from her worries, partly out of genuine curiosity about the man who had so unexpectedly become their protector. Hayes was quiet for so long that Bethany thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, wasn't much choice for a boy on his own in Texas after the war. Started as a stable hand when I was 12, learned to ride and rope, worked my way up to trail drives by 16. You've been on your own since you were 12. Bethany couldn't hide the shock in her voice. My mother died of fever that year, he said matter-of-factly. Father was already gone, killed at Gettysburg. I'm sorry, Bethany murmured, hearing the loss beneath his neutral tone. Hayes shrugged, a movement she felt rather than saw. It was a long time ago. And now, where is home for you? Wherever I hang my hat, he replied. Been drifting between ranches for years. Triple R is just the next stop. Something in his voice suggested there was more to the story, but Bethany didn't press. Everyone had things they preferred to keep private. She certainly did. They reached the creek crossing as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. True to Senora Diaz's word, Juan was waiting with a sturdy paint mare, already saddled and loaded with additional supplies. Hayes dismounted first, then helped Bethany down carefully, mindful of Emma. The young Mexican man greeted them with a nod, handing the mare's reins to Hayes. Gracias, Juan, Hayes said, pressing something into the man's hand payment. Bethany assumed. De nada, Juan replied. My mother says to tell you to avoid the main road to Benson. There are men asking questions at the way stations. Hayes nodded grimly. We'll keep to the back country. After Juan departed, Hayes helped Bethany mount the paint mare, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. Have you ridden much? He asked. I grew up on a small farm in Kansas, she replied. I've been riding since I could walk. A hint of approval crossed his face. Good. We'll make better time with 2 horses, but the terrain ahead is rough. Follow my lead and speak up if you need to rest. They continued southward as twilight descended, the desert landscape transforming around them. Shadows lengthened, and the heat of the day gave way to the cool of evening. Coyotes called in the distance, their eerie howls echoing across the vast emptiness. When full darkness fell, Hayes led them to a small arroyo where they could make camp, hidden from any passing riders. He built a small, nearly smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee. Bethany fed and changed Emma, grateful for the supplies Senora Diaz had provided. How far to Benson? She asked as they sat by the fire, Emma once again asleep in her arms. 3 days if the weather holds and we're not delayed, Hayes replied, sipping his coffee. Maybe 4 with the baby, Bethany nodded, staring into the flames. And you really think this, Mr. Richards might have worked for me. His wife passed last year. He has 2 young daughters being raised by an elderly housekeeper who's looking to retire. He mentioned needing help when I spoke with him last month. Hayes set his cup down. It's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. And if it doesn't work out? She hadn't meant to voice the fear aloud, but the words escaped anyway. Hayes met her gaze steadily across the fire. Then we'll find something else. I won't leave you and Emma stranded. The simple promise, spoken without flourish or expectation, touched something deep within Bethany. For the first time in months, perhaps since Thomas's death, she felt a flicker of real hope. Why are you doing this? She asked, the question that had been nagging at her since he first offered his help. The truth, please. Hayes was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. Because someone once did the same for my mother and me, he finally said. We were running too, though from different demons. A stranger helped us when no one else would. I swore I'd do the same if the opportunity ever came. What were you running from? Bethany asked softly. Hayes's jaw tightened. My father's family, they didn't approve of his marriage to my mother. She was half Cherokee, you see. When he died, they tried to take me away from her, claimed she was unfit. His voice grew hard. They would have separated us, just like your brother-in-law wanted to separate you and Emma, understanding dawned. That's why this matters so much to you. He nodded once. No child should be taken from a mother who loves them, not by men who care only for property and appearances. Bethany felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for telling me, she whispered, and thank you for helping us. Hayes looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some rest, he said, standing. I'll take first watch. I'll wake you in a few hours. But when Bethany woke to Emma's hungry cries in the pre-dawn darkness, she found Hayes still sitting vigilantly by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees. He had let her sleep through the night. The next 2 days settled into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or when Emma needed attention. Hayes proved to be a patient traveling companion, never complaining when they needed to stop for the baby and always alert to potential dangers. Each night, despite Bethany's protests, he took the majority of the watch, insisting she needed sleep more than he did. They avoided the main trails, instead following game paths and dry creek beds that Hayes seemed to know instinctively. The terrain grew more challenging, rocky hills and steep ravines replacing the flat desert, but the more difficult route offered better concealment from any pursuers. On the third evening, as they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Hayes announced that they were less than a day's ride from the Triple R Ranch. "We should reach it by tomorrow afternoon," he said, building their small fire. "Richards is expecting me, but not you and Emma." "Let me do the talking when we arrive," Bethany nodded, suddenly anxious about what awaited them. "Do you think Victor will track us this far?" Hayes considered the question seriously. "Blackwell is a stubborn man with resources and connections. If he's determined to find you, he won't give up easily." He added a small branch to the fire. "But the farther we get from his territory, the harder it becomes for him. The Triple R is beyond his usual sphere of influence." "I keep thinking about what happens next," Bethany admitted, cradling Emma, who was falling asleep after nursing. "Even if Mr. Richards gives me work, we'll still be looking over our shoulders. One step at a time," Hayes advised. "First, we get you and Emma safely to the ranch. Then we figure out the rest." "We," Bethany noted, "not you." The simple pronoun spoke volumes about Hayes's commitment to their safety. As if reading her thoughts, Hayes added, "I won't abandon you, Bethany, not until I'm certain you and Emma are truly safe." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what we would have done without you." A rare smile touched Hayes's lips, transforming his usual serious expression. "You'd have managed. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Bethany looked down at Emma, tracing a gentle finger over her daughter's soft cheek. "For her, I have to be." They fell into comfortable silence after that, the crackling fire and the distant call of night birds the only sounds in the canyon. When Emma was deeply asleep, Bethany carefully laid her on the bedroll, then moved to sit beside Hayes near the fire. "Tell me about the Triple R," she requested. "What kind of place is it?" Hayes added another small branch to the flames. "One of the better spreads in the territory. Richards runs about 2,000 head of cattle and has 20 men working for him. The ranch house is substantial 2 stories, built of stone and timber. There's a bunkhouse for the hands, a cookhouse, stables, and various outbuildings. And his daughters, how old are they? 7 and 10, I believe, Mary and Anne. I met them briefly when I spoke with Richards last month. Seem like good kids, though missing their mother something fierce." He glanced at her. "They'd likely take to you and Emma, might be good for all of you." The thought of a stable home, of children to care for alongside her daughter was almost too much to hope for. "It sounds wonderful," Bethany admitted, "almost too good to be true." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Hayes cautioned. "Ranch life is hard work, especially for a woman alone with a child. And Richards, while fair, runs a tight operation. He'll expect his money's worth from anyone he hires." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Bethany assured him. "And I'm good with children. Before I married Thomas, I taught at a small school in Kansas." Hayes looked surprised. "You're a teacher?" Bethany nodded. "For 3 years. I loved it, but then I met Thomas and he convinced me to come west with him." A familiar ache accompanied the memories. "He had such dreams for our ranch, for our future together." "I'm sorry about your husband," Hayes said quietly. "How did he die?" "Pneumonia," Bethany replied, the word still bitter on her tongue. "It came on suddenly last winter. One day he was breaking horses, the next he was bedridden with fever. He was gone within a week." She swallowed hard. "I was 5 months pregnant with Emma. Victor moved into the main house the day after the funeral, said a woman couldn't run a ranch, especially not one in the family." Hayes's expression darkened. "And he made his other intentions clear soon after?" Bethany nodded, wrapping her arms around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He waited until after Emma was born, came to my room one night, drunk and talking about making it official. Said it was the sensible thing to do. Her voice hardened. When I refused, he became angry, said no decent man would want me with another man's child, that I should be grateful for his offer. Hayes's hand clenched into a fist. Did he hurt you? He tried, Bethany answered simply. I had Thomas's revolver under my pillow. I didn't have to use it, but the threat was enough that time. The next day, he started talking about sending Emma away, said she was sickly and wouldn't survive the winter anyway. Her voice broke slightly. That's when I knew we had to leave. Hayes was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight with anger. Finally, he said, "You did the right thing leaving when you did. Men like Blackwell don't improve with time." "I know," Bethany agreed. "I just wish." She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the complex grief she felt, not just for Thomas, but for the life they had planned together, for the home she had been forced to abandon. "You wish you could have kept your husband's ranch," Hayes finished for her. "The home you made together." Bethany nodded, surprised at how easily he had read her thoughts. "It feels like I failed him somehow, leaving like that." "You protected your child," Hayes said firmly. "Thomas would have wanted that above all else, I'd wager." The simple truth of his words eased something in Bethany's heart. "Yes," she agreed softly. "He would have." They fell silent again, watching the fire together. Without conscious thought, Bethany found herself leaning slightly against Hayes's solid shoulder, taking comfort in his steady presence. He stiffened momentarily in surprise, then relaxed, neither encouraging nor discouraging the contact. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Bethany was acutely aware of her own heartbeat, of the warmth of Hayes beside her, of how long it had been since she had allowed herself to depend on anyone else. "We should get some rest," Hayes finally said, his voice low. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Bethany nodded and reluctantly moved away. "Wake me for the second watch this time," she insisted. "You need sleep too." Hayes's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Yes, madam." To Bethany's surprise, he actually did wake her a few hours later, though she suspected he had let her sleep longer than her fair share. Still, it was progress. She sat by the fire, rifle in hand, watching over Hayes and Emma as they slept, feeling for the first time in months that perhaps there was a future worth hoping for after all. Dawn broke clear and cold, the November air carrying the first real hint of winter. They broke camp quickly, eager to reach the Triple R before nightfall. Emma was unusually fussy that morning, perhaps sensing the tension in her mother as they neared their destination. The terrain gradually changed as they rode south, the barren desert giving way to grassland dotted with mesquite and scrub oak. By midday, they could see cattle grazing in the distance, the first sign that they were approaching ranching country. "Richards's land starts about 2 miles ahead," Hayes informed her as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. "We'll be on Triple R property soon." Bethany adjusted Emma in her sling, trying to quell the butterflies in her stomach. "What if he doesn't want us there?" She voiced her deepest fear. "What if we've come all this way for nothing?" Hayes looked at her steadily. "Then we'll find another solution. But Richards is a practical man. He needs help with his daughters, and you need a safe place for you and Emma. It's a fair exchange." Before Bethany could respond, Hayes suddenly went still, his head turning sharply to listen. "Riders," he said tersely, "coming fast from the north." Fear gripped Bethany's heart. "Victor? Can't tell yet." Hayes swung back onto his gelding. "Mount up now." Bethany scrambled onto the paint mare, her hands shaking as she gathered the reins. Hayes was already scanning the surrounding terrain, looking for cover. "There," he pointed to a copse of trees about a quarter-mile east. "Ride for those trees, don't stop for anything." Bethany kicked her mare into motion, one arm holding Emma securely against her chest. The paint responded instantly, breaking into a gallop across the open grassland. Bethany could hear Hayes close behind her, his gelding's hooves pounding the earth. They reached the trees just as the distant riders crested a hill to the north. Hayes dismounted quickly, helping Bethany down and leading both horses deeper into the small grove. "Stay here," he instructed, drawing his rifle. "If anything happens to me, keep riding south. You'll see the ranch buildings within an hour's ride." "Hayes, no," Bethany began, but he cut her off. "No arguments. Emma needs you." He checked his rifle, his expression grim. "I'll try to lead them away if it's Blackwell." Before she could protest further, he moved to the edge of the trees, positioning himself behind a large oak with a clear view of the approaching riders. Bethany crouched lower, holding Emma close, her heart hammering in her chest. The riders drew nearer, 4 men moving fast across the grassland. Even from a distance, Bethany recognized Victor's broad frame at the lead. How had he tracked them so far? Had someone in town talked after all? Hayes tensed beside her, raising his rifle. "It's Blackwell," he confirmed, "and 3 of his men." "Hayes, please," Bethany whispered urgently. "Don't try to fight them. There are too many." He glanced at her, his green eyes intense. "I won't let them take you and Emma." The riders were close enough now that Bethany could hear Victor's voice calling orders to his men. They were spreading out, clearly having spotted the tracks leading to the trees. Hayes took careful aim. "When I fire, they'll scatter. That's when you run straight south toward the ranch. Don't look back." "I can't leave you," Bethany protested, tears stinging her eyes. Hayes turned to her fully then, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "You can and you will. Emma needs her mother." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I'll find you, I promise." Before Bethany could respond, another sound cut through the tension, more hoofbeats coming from the south. Hayes swiveled, his rifle now pointed in the new direction. "More riders," he muttered. "At least 6. Bethany's hope crumbled. They were surrounded. But then Hayes lowered his rifle slightly, a look of surprise crossing his face. "It's Richards," he said, "and his men." Sure enough, a group of mounted cowboys was approaching rapidly from the direction of the Triple R, rifles visible in their hands. At their lead was a tall man with iron-gray hair and a full beard. As they drew closer, this man raised his hand, and his men fanned out in a defensive formation between Victor's group and the trees. "Blackwell," the man, presumably Richards, called out. "You're on Triple R land. State your business or turn back." Victor reined his horse to a halt, clearly taken aback by the unexpected confrontation. "This doesn't concern you, Richards," he shouted back. "I'm looking for a woman who stole from me. My brother's widow. She's traveling with an infant." Richards sat easily in his saddle, his rifle resting casually across his thighs. "No women or babies on my land except my own daughters," he replied. "Now I suggest you turn around and head back north. You're trespassing." Victor's face contorted with anger. "She's here somewhere. We tracked her this far." "Then your tracking skills need work," Richards responded coolly. "Now I won't ask again. Leave my land or my men will escort you off and they won't be gentle about it." The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Bethany held her breath, Emma clutched tightly to her chest. Beside her, Hayes remained poised to act if necessary. Finally, Victor spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he growled. "The woman is my family's responsibility. If you're harboring her, you'll regret it." "Your threats don't concern me, Blackwell," Richards replied evenly. "I've dealt with worse than you. Now go." With a final glare, Victor wheeled his horse around and signaled to his men. They turned and rode north, dust rising behind them. Richards watched until they were well away, then signaled to one of his men who rode toward the trees. "Zimmerman," he called. "That you in there?" Hayes stepped out from behind the oak, rifle lowered but still in hand. "It's me, Mr. Richards." "Thought that might be you," Richards said, dismounting and approaching. "Juan Diaz rode in last night, said you were bringing company and might have trouble on your tail." His keen eyes moved to Bethany, who had stepped hesitantly from the trees, Emma still in her arms. "This the company, I take it?" Hayes nodded. "Mr. Richards, this is Mrs. Bethany O'Connor and her daughter, Emma. Mrs. O'Connor, this is Elijah Richards, owner of the Triple R." Richards approached slowly, as if careful not to frighten her. He was older than Bethany had first thought, perhaps in his late 50s, with deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes were kind as they assessed her and the baby. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "looks like you've had a rough journey." "Yes, sir," Bethany replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "and I'm very grateful for your intervention just now." Richards glanced back in the direction Victor had disappeared. "Blackwell's had a reputation for years. Never met the man before today, but I've heard stories." He looked back at her. "Juan said you might be needing work and a place to stay. If you have something suitable, yes," Bethany answered, straightening her shoulders. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Richards. I was a teacher before my marriage, and I'm good with children." "I understand you have daughters who might need looking after." A flash of pain crossed the older man's weathered face. "Mary and Anne, yes, lost their mother last winter. My housekeeper does her best, but she's getting on in years." He studied Bethany thoughtfully. "Teacher, you say?" "Yes, sir." "For 3 years in Kansas." Richards nodded slowly. "The girls have been without proper schooling since Martha passed. I've been meaning to hire someone, but qualified women are scarce out here." He seemed to come to a decision. "I can offer you room and board for you and your little one, plus a modest salary in exchange for teaching my girls and helping with the household." Relief flooded through Bethany. "That would be most acceptable, Mr. Richards. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Richards warned. "It's hard work and the girls can be a handful, but you'll have a roof over your head and Blackwell won't dare come onto my property again." He glanced at Hayes. "Zimmerman here can vouch for my character if you have concerns." Hayes nodded. "Mr. Richards runs a respectable operation. You and Emma will be safe here." "Then I accept your offer with gratitude," Bethany said firmly. Richards smiled for the first time, softening his stern features. "Good, then let's get you to the house. You look dead on your feet, and that little one could probably use a proper crib after all this traveling." As Richards turned to give instructions to his men, Hayes moved to Bethany's side. "Told you Richards was a fair man," he said quietly. "You were right," she acknowledged. "I can hardly believe our luck." A shadow crossed Hayes's face. "It's not luck. Richards is a good judge of character and he needs help with his daughters. It's a fair exchange." Something in his tone gave Bethany pause. "You sound like you're saying goodbye," she observed, a sudden tightness in her chest. Hayes looked away. "I signed on as a ranch hand, not a teacher or nursemaid. My place will be in the bunkhouse with the other men." "But you'll still be here," Bethany pointed out, "on the ranch." "For a time," he agreed. "But a cowboy's life is moving on when the job is done." The thought of Hayes leaving this man who had risked so much to help them, who had become so important to her in such a short time, sent a wave of sadness through Bethany. But before she could respond, Richards called them to mount up. The ride to the ranch house was mercifully short. As they crested a small rise, Bethany got her first view of what would be her new home. Hayes's description had been accurate. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure of stone and timber, surrounded by various outbuildings. A large barn stood nearby, and beyond it, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. As they approached, 2 young girls burst from the front door, racing across the yard to meet their father. Richards dismounted quickly, gathering both into a fierce hug. They were pretty children with their father's dark hair and what must have been their mother's delicate features. "Girls," Richards said as Bethany dismounted with Hayes's help, "this is Mrs. O'Connor and her daughter, Emma. Mrs. O'Connor is going to be your new teacher and will be staying with us." The older girl, Anne, Bethany presumed regarded her with solemn eyes. "Do you know arithmetic?" she asked seriously. "Papa says I need to learn it properly." Bethany smiled, charmed by the child's directness. "I do indeed, and reading, writing, history, and even a bit of Latin if you're interested." Anne's eyes widened slightly. "Latin, like in the Bible?" "Exactly like that," Bethany confirmed. The younger girl, Mary, had been staring at Emma with undisguised fascination. "Is that your baby?" she asked. "Can I see her?" Bethany knelt carefully, adjusting Emma so the child could see her face. "This is Emma. She's 3 months old." Mary's face lit up with delight. "She's so tiny. Can I hold her sometime? I'm very careful. Papa says I have gentle hands." "When she's awake later, perhaps," Bethany promised, touched by the child's enthusiasm. Richards cleared his throat. "Mrs. Finch has prepared a room for you upstairs. Girls, why don't you show Mrs. O'Connor to her room so she can rest? I need to speak with Mr. Zimmerman about his duties." As the girls eagerly led Bethany toward the house, she glanced back at Hayes, who stood talking with Richards, his tall figure outlined against the setting sun. He looked up, meeting her gaze across the yard, and the intensity in his green eyes sent a shiver through her. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Bethany settled into life at the Triple R. Mrs. Finch, the elderly housekeeper, was delighted to have help with the girls and the household duties. The children, starved for female attention since their mother's death, quickly attached themselves to Bethany and were fascinated by baby Emma. Formal lessons began in the ranch house's small study, which Richards had outfitted with a blackboard and 2 small desks. Both girls were bright and eager to learn, though Anne had a particular aptitude for mathematics that impressed Bethany. Hayes, meanwhile, had taken up his duties as a ranch hand, riding out each morning with the other cowboys and returning late in the day, often covered in dust and looking exhausted. Bethany caught glimpses of him from the windows or across the yard, but they rarely spoke. He seemed to be deliberately keeping his distance, and she didn't know how to bridge the growing gap between them. A week after their arrival, as Bethany sat on the front porch in the evening, Emma asleep in a cradle Richards had brought down from the attic, she spotted Hayes walking from the bunkhouse toward the barn. On impulse, she called out to him. He paused, then changed direction, approaching the porch slowly. "Evening, Mrs. O'Connor," he said formally, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she assured him. "I just haven't had a chance to speak with you since we arrived." "You seem to be avoiding the house." Hayes removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Didn't want to intrude. You're settling in with the girls and I have my duties." "You wouldn't be intruding," Bethany said softly. "I've missed our conversations." Something flickered in Hayes's eyes. "It's better this way," he said after a moment. "You and Emma have a chance at a real home here. Richards is a good man and the girls already adore you." "That doesn't mean I've forgotten what you did for us," Bethany countered. "You risked your life to bring us here safely. I can never repay that." Hayes shook his head. "I don't want repayment." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "But seeing you and Emma safe, that's enough." Bethany studied him in the fading light, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "Will you really leave when spring comes?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since their arrival. Hayes looked away. "That was always the plan. Cowboys aren't meant to stay in one place too long." "Plans can change," Bethany said, her heart beating faster. "People can change them." Hayes looked back at her, a complex emotion in his eyes. "Bethany." He rarely used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent warmth through her. "You've been through so much. You're still grieving your husband, still establishing a new life for yourself and Emma. The last thing you need is, don't tell me what I need," Bethany interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "I know what loss feels like, Hayes, and yes, I love Thomas and I still mourn him, but he's gone and Emma and I are still here, still living." She took a deep breath. "And in the short time I've known you, you've shown me more kindness and courage than most men show in a lifetime." Hayes stepped closer, one foot on the bottom porch step. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want you to leave," Bethany admitted. "Not in the spring, not ever. I'm saying that against all logic and propriety, I've developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude." Hayes stared at her, conflict clear on his face. "Bethany, the front door opened suddenly and Anne stepped out. Mrs. O'Connor, Papa wants to know if you'd like some coffee before," she stopped, noticing Hayes. "Oh, hello, Mr. Zimmerman." Hayes stepped back, replacing his hat. "Evening, Miss Anne. I was just checking that Mrs. O'Connor and Emma had everything they needed." Anne nodded seriously. Papa says we're to make sure they're comfortable. He says Mrs. O'Connor is a blessing to this household. A small smile touched Hayes's lips. Your father is a wise man. He tipped his hat to Bethany. Good night, Mrs. O'Connor. Good night, Mr. Zimmerman, Bethany replied, hiding her disappointment at the interruption, as Hayes walked away and sat beside Bethany on the porch swing. Do you like Mr. Zimmerman? She asked with a child's directness. Bethany felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Zimmerman is a good man who helped Emma and me when we needed it most. Anne considered this. Papa says he's the best cowhand he's hired in years, says he has a natural way with horses and a level head in a crisis. She looked up at Bethany with serious eyes. Papa also says he looks at you the way Papa used to look at Mama. Bethany's breath caught. Your father said that? Anne nodded. Last night at dinner when you went upstairs to put Emma to bed, he told Mrs. Finch that Mr. Zimmerman was fighting a losing battle trying to keep his distance from you. I see, Bethany murmured, her heart beating faster. And what do you think about that, Anne? The girl shrugged. I think Mary and I would like having a man around who isn't just Papa, and Emma needs a father. She stood up. Are you coming in for coffee? Bethany smiled at the child's matter-of-fact assessment. In a few minutes. I want to enjoy the evening air a bit longer. After Anne went inside, Bethany remained on the porch, her thoughts in turmoil. Was Richards right? Was Hayes fighting his feelings for her? And if so, why? The answer came 3 days later when Bethany encountered Hayes alone in the stable. She had gone to check on her paint mare, which had become her personal mount for rides around the ranch property. Hayes was brushing down his gelding in the adjacent stall. Good morning, she greeted him, determined not to let his reserve deter her. Hayes nodded in acknowledgement. Mrs. O'Connor. I think after everything we've been through together, you might call me Bethany, she suggested, entering her mare's stall. Hayes continued brushing his horse. Wouldn't be proper. Propriety didn't seem to concern you when you were helping me and Emma escape from Victor, Bethany pointed out. Why does it matter so much now? Hayes's hands stilled. Because things are different now, you have a position here, respect. The last thing you need is gossip about you and a cowhand. Is that what this is about? Bethany asked, moving closer to the partition between the stalls. You think you're not good enough because you're a ranch hand and I'm the children's teacher? Hayes finally looked at her, his green eyes troubled. I'm a drifter, Bethany. Have been since I was 12 years old. I don't have land or money or education. What could I possibly offer you and Emma? Safety, Bethany answered immediately. Kindness, loyalty, courage, all the things you've already shown us. She reached across the partition, her hand hovering near his arm. All the things that matter far more than property or position. Hayes stared at her hand, then slowly, deliberately set down his brush and covered her fingers with his own. The simple touch sent warmth spiraling through Bethany. I've never stayed in one place more than a season, he said quietly. Never allowed myself to want something permanent. It seemed safer that way. And now, Bethany prompted, her heart in her throat. Hayes's fingers tightened around hers. Now I find myself thinking about tomorrow and next month and next year, and in every one of those tomorrows I see you and Emma. Joy bloomed in Bethany's chest. I see you too, she whispered, in all my tomorrows. Hayes moved then, coming around the partition to stand before her. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to her cheek. I have nothing to offer but myself, he said softly. And a promise that no one will ever harm you or Emma while I draw breath. Bethany leaned into his touch. That's more than enough, she assured him. That's everything. When Hayes finally lowered his head to kiss her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss tentative at first, then deepening as Bethany responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her own. When they parted, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I think I have since that first night in the line shack when you stood at my door with Emma in your arms, looking both terrified and determined. Bethany smiled, joy bubbling up inside her. I love you too, she replied. And I think part of me has known it since you held us both and promised to keep us safe." A sound at the stable door made them step apart. Richard stood there, an amused expression on his weathered face. "Wondered how long it would take you two to figure things out," he said dryly. Bethany blushed, but Hayes met his employer's gaze steadily. "Mr. Richards," Richards waved a hand. "Save it, Zimmerman, I've seen the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you." He stepped into the stable. "Question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Hayes glanced at Bethany, then back at Richards. "With your permission, sir, I'd like to court Mrs. O'Connor properly, and if she'll have me, make her my wife." Bethany's heart soared at the declaration. Richards nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "Thought you might say that." "Well, can't have my girl's teacher living in sin with one of my ranch hands." His stern expression softened. "My Martha would have liked you both. She always believed in second chances." "Does this mean you approve?" Bethany asked hesitantly. Richards snorted. "Means I'm not blind, Mrs. O'Connor. I've seen how happy my girls are since you arrived, and how much better Zimmerman here works when he has someone to work for." He fixed Hayes with a pointed look. "Foreman's cabin has been empty since old Jim retired last spring. Needs some fixing up, but it would suit a family better than the bunkhouse or a room in the main house." Hayes stared at him. "Foreman? Been thinking about it for a while," Richards replied. "You've got a good head on your shoulders and the men respect you. Job's yours if you want it." He looked between them. "Assuming you're planning to stay, that is." Hayes looked at Bethany, a question in his eyes. She nodded, smiling through sudden tears. "We're staying," Hayes confirmed, turning back to Richards, "and I accept the position with gratitude." Richards nodded once, satisfied. "Good. Now if you two are done making eyes at each other, there's work to be done." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Zimmerman? Reverend Tompkins visits the ranch the first Sunday of each month for services. Performs marriages too, if you're inclined." After Richards left, Bethany and Hayes looked at each other in stunned silence for a moment, then both burst into laughter. "Well," Hayes said, taking her hands in his, "that was unexpected." "All of it," Bethany agreed. The foreman position, the cabin, the not-so-subtle suggestion about marriage. Hayes's expression grew serious. "About that last part, I meant what I said about wanting to marry you, Bethany, but only if you're ready." "I know it hasn't been long since Thomas." Bethany placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "Thomas would want Emma and me to be happy and safe," she said softly, "and you make us both feel that way." She took a deep breath. "So yes, Hayes Zimmerman, I will marry you whenever you're ready to ask properly." Hayes smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Then consider this me asking properly," he said, dropping to one knee before her. "Bethany O'Connor, will you and Emma do me the honor of becoming my family? Will you marry me and let me be a father to your daughter?" Tears of joy spilled down Bethany's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." Hayes stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. 1 month later, on a clear December morning, Bethany stood beside Hayes in the Triple Artiquesse main parlor as Reverend Tompkins pronounced them husband and wife. Emma, growing plumper and more alert each day, was cradled in Mary's careful arms, while Anne stood proudly as Bethany's attendant. Richards gave the bride away, his weathered face softened with genuine pleasure. As Hayes slipped a simple gold band onto Bethany's finger, purchased with his first wages as foreman, he repeated the words he'd said that night when Victor and his men had surrounded them. Words that had become a promise between them. "I'll find you, I promise." And Bethany, her heart full to bursting, whispered back her own promise. "I'll always be waiting." That evening, as they sat on the porch of the foreman's cabin, Hayes held Emma on his lap while Bethany rested against his shoulder. The baby had taken to him immediately, as if somehow knowing this was the man who had helped save her, who had pledged to protect her always. "What are you thinking?" Bethany asked, noticing Hayes's contemplative expression as he watched Emma grab at his finger. "I'm thinking about how different my life is from what I expected," he replied. "A month ago I was a drifter with no home and no family. Now I have both." He looked at her, love evident in his eyes. "And I'm thinking about how a woman and her baby changed everything for me." Bethany smiled, remembering those desperate days of flight, the fear and uncertainty that had eventually led them here to this moment of perfect contentment. "And I'm thinking about how a cowboy held us both and said we'd stay with him," she murmured, "and how right he was." As the sun set over the Triple R, casting golden light across their new home, Hayes Zimmerman held his new family close, knowing that for the first time in his life he had found a place and people worth staying for. And Bethany, safe in her husband's arms with her daughter between them, felt the last shadows of fear finally fade away. The path ahead was clear now, illuminated by love and the promise of all their tomorrows together.